All right. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the Storybrewers Hacking Q&A. As the Storybrewers community fosterer, Kimberly, hello, I will be supporting our amazing co-founder, Hayley, by asking them the questions that you've submitted about hacking, and then they'll be answering them. Nice and easy. But I'm going to first hand it over to Hayley to do a bit of an introduction on the basics of hacking Storybrewers games.
Hello. Yes, I'm really excited that we are finally doing this Q&A. I think that hacking games is great and it's so much fun, no matter whether you're just tinkering around with a few little changes to give something a different flavor or flair, or you're going all the way to creating your own supplement or full-on game. It's something that can really release the creative juices. For me, hacking is like a sort of dreaming where you play something and you feel the potential for a story on the edge of the story that the game is currently built to tell. A sort of possibility space opens up and you just reach for it. And that's why you start, changing things to get closer to that experience. And eventually you're like, oh yeah, this is doing the thing I want. And that's a good feeling. And to get to that experience, you might change one thing, you might change a few things, or maybe you find yourself changing more things over time as you're reaching closer to where you want to be and, enjoying the process along the way, and hopefully sharing that process with other people too. So as much as we do love to make new games, I also do love to tinker, and I do quite a bit of hacking myself. And we also have a really lovely and supportive creative and hacking culture on our server, as many of you would know, being there, which is really lovely and a great way to share in that creativity. And right now, one of our server members, Chloe, who goes by Small Stories on Itch, is running a game jam called A Good Brew, #2 actually, which is for creating Storybrewers game stuff, from hacks to supplements or even new content like Desires or Fight with Spirit match games. So if you're interested in hacking one of our games, absolutely check that out. You can search A Good Brew 2 on Itch, or I will put it in the notes in YouTube when this goes up on YouTube. And
I
I'm
believe
working
that is
on,
open until the end of this year, the end of
yes.
2024. It's open through December 31st.
Yes, so even if you're watching this a month later, you still have plenty of time because it's open till the end of 2024. And I'm working on a Good Society supplement for that called Pour Forth Thy Soul, which adds some fun things like poetry and, even more yearning, because I'm like, how much yearning can we stuff into a game? So I'm excited about that. And for those who are sort of looking at taking a hack of a Storybrewers game to the point where you're actually publishing it, whether it is for dollars or just to share with the wider world, there are a couple of permissions that we have that you should be aware of. So I'm just going to run through those quickly. And you can find these both on our website if you go to the community brewed section of our website, but I will link these as well. So first we have our general community brewed content permissions, and that covers all our games except Good Society. And this one is really simple. It just basically comes down to credit us and don't substantially reproduce our work without permission or steal our art. And that's basically it. And there's a cool badge for that, which you'll find on that page also that you can put on your work. And secondly, there is a specific permission set for Good Society, which is called Pen to Good Society. And I know many people watching this have made their own Pen to Good Society content. And the permissions are actually very similar in their general intent to the community brewed one, but it's just a bit more specific to mirror the structure and parts of Good Society. So if you're making something from Good Society, you can go and check that out as well. But always, if you have any questions about permissions or the way any of that works, you can reach out to me and ask. And speaking of questions that are not about that, but are about other things, let's get into them. I'll hand back over to you, Kimberly.
So all of these questions have been pre-submitted by people in our Discord community. Yay, appreciate you all. The first one is, how do you decide what narrative elements merit a mechanic to back them up rather than just using flavor text?
I think this is a really good question, and I think it's quite a different question to answer in the context of hacking an existing game versus like if you're making your own general game design. Because when you're hacking a game, you're coming into a situation where you're working with something that's already balanced in a specific way. So for me, the default view there is like, how can I make the experience I want while also leaving what is already in place working for me as much as possible? There's a reason why I'm choosing to hack this game rather than start from scratch, right? There are things that it does that I like. And that's something you need to consider when looking at both the mechanics of the game, but also the text itself. So usually you'll want to change things sort of slowly and start at the beginning and think, oh, is as you go through, sort of change things iteratively and think, okay, is this the experience I want, or is something still missing from what I'm trying to create? And you can kind of think broadly that you can start with changing non-load bearing text first, and then load bearing text, and then moving there into like altering mechanics, and then finally thinking of new mechanics. And you'll see as you go, as you start changing things, oh, is this doing enough? Or do I need to keep going? And running it is obviously the number one best and easiest way to see, hey, is this doing what I want right now? Or does it need new stuff? So if you're not sure, you can always play test it with fewer mechanical changes and sort of check if it feels like something is missing. And if it is so what do you think is missing? Or what do you think could enhance the experience a bit more? That's pretty much how we actually made the Fey Courts expansion. That's an expanded acquaintance. I started with, what if it's Pride, Prejudice, and Practical Magics, but we were at the Fey Courts? And the only thing I really changed was pretty much flavor text, and then added a little extra around collaboration. And then after I ran that, I was like, oh, I get it. I can see what would really make this like into its own thing a little bit more. And then ended up making a couple of small mechanical changes from there to get it to the final state that it's in now. So that process has really been useful for me. So basically, what I'm saying is start with the narrative side of things, check, and then move to the mechanical side of things. It's not always possible to know ahead of time which one is going to be more effective. And I think in doing this, it definitely helps with this to understand the mechanical role of things in the game, because a lot of things that can seem to just be flavor text actually are doing more mechanically than you think. So, for example, in Good Society, desire is a flavor text, but they're also a mechanic. And, when you are writing desires, you want to be writing flavor text that's going to have the right mechanical effect on the game. So understanding that stuff can really help. And if you play the game a lot, you probably already know it.
That's very true. A more technical question, how do you learn to make formulas for online character keepers? What are some essential formulas that you think people should know?
Yeah, this is a great question, which I'm eminently unqualified to answer. I kind of understand the basics, but a lot of what you can do in cheats is beyond me. And I know there's a lot more that you can do than I currently do. I think the basics is like not even necessarily diving into formulas right away, but just making sure everything is there and neat and well sorted and easy to understand. Because if people can find where things go, and you can use drop downs too, which don't actually require any like formulas or anything necessarily. You can just set those up. And as long as everything is there and sorted and neat, that's a good starting place. And to be honest, I'm not that much further than that. Kimberly's sheet, on the other hand, is far better than mine and far more automated. Kimberly, did you have any advice on this one?
Well, the question, how do you learn to make formulas for online character keepers? I search for them. I go on my little internet browser. I was gonna say Google, but I use DuckDuckGo, so I DuckDuckGo, and I search for, how do I do this thing? Like, my favorite is the concatenate. It's sort of an autofill. So, if you put in your major character's name, it's going to auto-populate in a series of other spaces throughout the sheet so that you don't have to keep putting the same information in. So things that make your life easier or the future players' lives easier going down the road. I looked at it as sort of what would make this easier as an experience. Like, what are the things when I'm doing this game after game where I'm like, man, I wish I didn't have to do that. And it's retyping my character's name 800 times. There's also um, a safety sheet that I like to sort of copy paste and reuse that was given to me by somebody else who created it, but it has check boxes and it autofills to another box where if the checkbox is checked, it's going to autofill that text. So things like that, and just finding ways for people to play in a more streamlined way and going, what is it? What is the need that I want to solve? And then DuckDuckGoing or Googling or Binging if you're going wild. I don't know. What those formulas might be. That would be my advice for that.
And as well as that, if there is a character keeper that you really like, you can copy it and unhide or every secret tab and information, and kind of like reverse engineer how it got to be the way it is. That's kind of how I like in the beginning, just finding ones that I liked and doing that really.
And also, there's a lot of spreadsheet nerds out there. I know and love many, and sometimes if you're just like, does anybody know how to do this thing? People will just give you their homebrew, community brewed knowledge on that, which is, really nice and helps make it more of a team effort, even if they're not like doing everything else with you. Is there anything else you would like to add, Hayley?
No, I think that's as much information as I could possibly summon on that topic.
Okay. All right. And then can you tell us at what point would a hack be rules complete? And also, can you explain what rules complete means?
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure because this question was submitted via the form, what the person writing it meant by rules complete. I could think that there might be two different interpretations here. One is like standalone, meaning that a hack does no longer need the original game to play. And another interpretation could be just that it is essentially like contained within itself in terms of the rules that it has. Like you can basically read it and understand how to play it without needing to like fill in any gaps yourself. I would imagine this probably means standalone because like that seems more significant of the two. But then I don't have any good answer except for saying, well, a hack is standalone when you can play it without the original game. Yeah, which isn't very helpful. I think maybe there's more of a question in whether or not what you're creating should be aiming to be standalone versus something that makes use of the original. Because I would say most of the time when you're hacking a game, you don't necessarily need to be aiming for something that is standalone. I think that something standalone is most appropriate when you're really reinterpreting or recontextualizing the rules of the original game to the point where it no longer makes sense to be like, oh, use these rules, but. So if you're working on a hack and you're sort of like, oh, use these rules, but none of them is written and all of them differently and split them into parts in a different order, then at that point you might be like, oh, hey, maybe I kind of need to make this standalone. And I think to a lesser degree, if you're making something that you want to be rules complete that isn't standalone, you can also use this kind of thinking. So this is exactly what we did in Expanded Acquaintance. We were like, oh, the sections that are still very clearly as they were, maybe only changed in a very small way, are basically going to leave most of the rules explaining those to the base game because the base game explains them perfectly well. But where it's something where it's like, we're going to take that, get some scissors, chop it up, rearrange it like a collage, we're going to try to explain that whole section, even if we're duplicating the rules of the base game a bit, so that people can easily understand and follow it without having to essentially remake the collage themselves. So I think that might be the best answer for that question.
Great. Thank you. All right, so this next crop of questions is specific to good society. Um, and the first one is, what are the basics of a desire and how do you make a good desire?
This is a fantastic question and one that I have lost many hours of my life to thinking about. I do want to say, firstly, if you are making a Pen to Good Society hack, I would really recommend looking at Expanded Acquaintance because it does contain a guide to hacking Good Society that I very much still stand by. And specifically, that's quite useful for giving you a framework with which to create your hack. It kind of takes you through step by step, but it also does have commentary on like each of the individual parts, such as desires, reputation conditions, some other things we'll talk about today. So that is pretty useful as a reference. If there's anything that you're like, oh, Hayley, you missed this thing, or you didn't talk about how to do this, take a look there. I might have talked about it there. But onto the question of what makes good desires and what are the basics of a desire. I think desires do so much work in good society, and they're not as simple as they first appear necessarily. So there's quite a lot to say on this. In the Good Society base rulebook, it gives you the absolute basics of making a desire, which I think is in the upkeep section. And basically, it says that a desire should be suitably dramatic, hard to accomplish, but not impossible, connected to at least one major character, and something that you can achieve through the actions of your major character. And that I think is good, but a lot of the really good desires also do a bunch of other things, which I think I do talk about in Expanded Acquaintance, which is to involve multiple player characters, whether that's directly by mentioning them, for example, restore your object of affection's reputation. Well, there you have direct link to another character who's your object of affection, or by necessary implication. So remove yourself from your family legacy and make your own mark. Doesn't specifically involve another major character, but in the context of the game, it's highly likely to do so. And they should also contain an inherent conflict, or at least the potential for a conflict, which can mean that perhaps the desire requires something difficult, or require something significant from another major character. For example, if you want to marry your secret fiance, who's another major character, that's going to require something significant from another major character. But broadly, things that are going to put you at odds with either the world around you or the other major characters or connections in the game. And lastly, desires tend to be at their best when they affect the push and pull between the needs of the different player characters. And this can often be as much about the playset that you're planning to put the desire in as the desire itself as well. So this can be contextual to the other characters or the overall context. So a great example is Kimberly's Legally Distinct Pride and Prejudice playset, where because of the fact that all the characters in that playset are siblings, some desires that might ordinarily be like, okay, you're off doing your own thing, good for you, become really important because you're all so connected to this one family and one reputation, one wealth pool. So that can be something to think about as well. And so this is why one of my favorite desires in the base game, and I will throw it into any playset like it is a secret sauce, is determine your love's true feelings and reestablish your engagement. Because this desire inherently involves multiple characters. You have the push and pull between the major character who holds the desire and the character they love. And it also has this inherent conflict in it from two aspects. Firstly, they want something significant from another major character, to find out their feelings and possibly reestablish their engagement. But also, they kind of created their own problem with this by shutting down that person the first time and pushing them away for whatever reason. So there's a conflict there, both with that other person, but also with the other people who are like, hey, you don't want to marry that person. So there's a lot to draw on to create really juicy relationships and drama in that desire. Two other tips for desires. These are things that we found out through a lot of play testing. Desires should relate to whatever is within the sphere of the game. But that sphere will depend on your hack, not on good society itself. So, for example, the desire convince your father to start a business with you would be not a good society desire, even if your father is a major character, because starting businesses isn't something that's really impactful within the world of good society. But it could be a great desire for something like Castles in the Air, where that is like very much within the scope of the story and the things that it's built to tell. Another one that really falls this way is desires about investigating things. Really don't tend to work well in good society because it's not a game about investigating things. But those desires can work really well for something like Thinly Veiled, which is kind of like a otherworldly spiritualist
It's basically gothic horror.
Yeah.
Game.
Thank you. That's a much better way of putting it. And Gothic Society, which is also a Gothic horror good society.
Yeah. That one's more like if you want to recreate sort of like a monster movie or like a, traditional like vampire story. And then, there's lots of options for things.
But investigating desires work very well in both of those games because they fit into the genre and the scope of events you think would be happening in that game, as opposed to base good society where they don't really fit in. So you need to think about making the desires within the sphere of the game, but that can be the sphere of your own hack. It doesn't have to be the sphere of good society itself. And the second thing is that it's great if your desires imply things about other major characters, as I've mentioned, but they shouldn't need too much fictional content from that other major character. So, for example, you don't want a desire that relies on another major character having a child outside of wedlock or something like that, because that is too much to say about a major character that didn't get the chance to opt in by choosing the desire themselves. For the major character who chose the desire to have a child out of wedlock, fantastic, great, love it. But it shouldn't apply that about a major character that didn't actually choose that desire. They didn't get the choice to opt in. Note that you can, so that's kind of like my top desire tips. Note that you can probably break some of what I've talked about and still have a good desire in your hands. But in my opinion, these are like the combination of ingredients that generally make desires work better in the game.
Amazing. So moving from desires to reputation, what is your advice for making a good reputation condition? What are things to think about for changing reputation or even replacing it with a new mechanic?
Yeah, so I think that developing reputation conditions can be one of the hardest parts of creating character roles. They do take a little thinking. In my mind, the best reputation conditions are both general enough to fit a range of circumstances and stories, but also have consequences specific enough to impact the story. So basically, they could apply in lots of different situations, but when they do apply, they make a concrete change that you can see. For example, I think the reputation condition fracture is the general use reputation condition that I'll always point to for this. Someone close to you is appalled by your behavior and refuses to talk to you. This condition could apply in almost any circumstance, as nearly all major characters can be close to someone that they will offend. But the consequence of it is very specific, so it's clear to see how it will impact the story. I think to expand on what makes a good reputation condition or some considerations around making a reputation condition a bit further, when you're creating a reputation condition, you can consider some factors like what needs to happen in the story for this condition to make sense. Is this too difficult to satisfy to meet this condition, or is it like reasonably easy to satisfy? So, for example, if a reputation condition requires a character to actively have some suitors or admirers, you can see, oh, that's a condition that's something that has to be happening in the fiction for this to make sense. But given this character role is probably likely to have that, it's probably okay for one of the conditions, but you might want to balance it with a different condition that doesn't have any of those kind of requirements. So thinking about that can be helpful. You can also think about like how easy is the condition to bring into the story? Will it impact the story straight away? Does it take a lot of effort to introduce? Or is it likely to kind of like hit the ground running? Or are you going to have to like author a strange series of circumstances before it becomes relevant? So that's one thing to think about. And again, you can balance this. You can have one rep condition, which is like hit the ground running, and another one, which is like a little bit more specific, is fine as well. And then one which I have discovered a little bit more retrospectively after we finished designing the character roles for the game is to check whether your reputation condition is going to force another major character to change their behavior or feelings. Because this is something that we actually have run into problems with the cornerstone negative reputation conditions. And as a result, that particular condition stands out for me among all the character role rep conditions as not really often working well in the game. So I'm going to dive into that a little bit as a learning experience for me. So one of the cornerstone negative rep conditions is unwanted presence, which is your family members reject your advice, support, and affection. And the problem with this condition, you might now spot it right away, is too global. So that means that any major characters who are part of your family must change their behavior. So imagine this in a game where you're all siblings. Every single major character has to change how they feel about you. And you don't want this. You don't want to force major characters to have to change their feelings. So I think this is a good contrast to something like Fracture, which is similar in that someone becomes appalled and refuses to talk to you. But it's much better because in that case, you pick the person and you can choose someone who it makes sense for in the story. So that change of mindset isn't forced. So that's what I would say, some tips for creating reputation conditions. As for changing or replacing reputation, I think the main thing here to consider is sort of the work that reputation does in good society and how or if really you plan to keep that work in your hack. So reputation, in my view, is both a reflective exercise on what society thinks about you, tags that you add to help inform the way that society thinks about you as the game goes on. And it also adds another dimension to the duty-desire conflict that underpins good society, because if you stray too far into your own desires, then you get a negative rep condition often. If you push yourself to uphold society's norms, you often will get a positive rep condition. So it enhances that conflict that exists in good society. So if you kind of are aware of those functions, you can think, are these things important to me? Do I need to keep them in the game? And if so, how am I going to do that? If I change reputation or whatever it is. And if they're not important to me and I no longer care about them being in the game, do I need to replace them with anything else? And your answer could easily be yes or no. So for example, I mentioned before, I'm working on a supplement called Pour Forth Thy Soul. And that actually removes reputation for a very specific reason. So in that supplement, the characters are on vacation. They are spending a month in the country writing poetry. And the whole point of that is they're away from their normal life. And it finally doesn't matter what society thinks about them for this tiny short time. And so I've actually removed reputation from that to highlight this freedom. So as long as you're like consciously aware of the role it plays in the game and how you want to play with that in your hack, you can take it the way that works best for you.
Thanks. All right. And then what do you think makes a game or idea suitable for penned to good society? You know, what sort of things break the good society system? Or like what kinds of indicators show you basically when should I stop trying to hack good society and look for a different system to find what I'm doing?
Great question. There's definitely like scope here, to bend things beyond probably what I'm going to talk about, and exceptions to what I'm going to say. But here is like my general feelings about this. For me, it kind of comes down to like three main questions that you can kind of ask yourself. Firstly, are you here for the drama or rom-com vibes? Because if you are focusing on the drama, if you're all about the drama, then good society is your friend. And I don't mean like drama tone. I mean drama like interpersonal relationships, like, I am here for the drama. If you say that, then Good Society is probably going to work for you. If you're like, no, I'm not really interested in the drama between characters, Good Society might not be a good fit because it's essentially a drama machine. Second question is, what do you imagine the characters to be doing during the game? So Good Society is going to fit best for games that focus on relationships, scandal, romance, intrigue, yearning, introspection, all those things. So if your game concept, you imagine that you spend a lot of time fighting, exploring, sneaking, that other systems might present a better option than Good Society. That said, if you want it all, you can mix. I have learned this from other people. You can mix Good Society with other systems like Court of Fate and Flowers. And while it is more technically difficult to mix the systems together, you can then end up with something that can do these different aspects and just sort of use the Good Society inspired stuff for the bits that Good Society is good for. And the third question, and this is actually the one I see trip people up most often, because the first two things I've said are intuitive to many people. They're like, oh yeah, Good Society, a drama game about drama. I should probably use it for drama things. But the third one I do see people trip up on, and that is the drama between the characters? And specifically, could it be between the major characters? Because fundamentally, Good Society is so much better if the major characters have drama between them, rather than it being something that's just with the connections or the external world. And that doesn't mean that the characters can't be working together to achieve something as well. Like in Sense, Sensibility, and Swordsmanship, they're working together against the big bad oftentimes, but they also have drama between them, a lot of high stakes drama between them as well. And that drama between the major characters, in my view, is really vital to bringing out what's best in Good Society. So I would definitely think that that's something that might make a game idea more suitable for Pen to Good Society, versus if the drama is really with external forces, maybe not the best system for that. Other than what I mentioned above, I think the quickest way to break Good Society, to use that terminology, is to replace consent-focused mechanics with success-fail mechanics. So basically, if you wanted to be like, goodbye result tokens, hello random dice rolls, that's probably going to change the game so much that you're probably outside the scope. If you had to change one thing to most put you outside the scope of the game, it would probably be that.
That makes sense.
Because the core of the game is using groupthink to consensually negotiate your character's angst, really. So that's probably what I would say there.
All right. And then last specific Good Society question. Monologue tokens and epistolary phases are so key to what makes Good Society great, but it's also really tied to the specifics of 19th century literature. Do you have any advice or thoughts about using or adapting these in other settings, genres, and styles?
Yeah, so I think that I've seen people do this really well. Because when you think about what these things are, monologue token is just a moment of seeing inside someone's head, of seeing their thoughts. And in a lot of ways, you see that replicated on a lot of TV shows and movies. Famously, the beginning of Emperor's New Groove, Riza Llama, you're wondering how I got here. That's internal monologue. That's all monologue. So monologue tokens kind of fit very well, regardless of the setting. And I don't think I've seen trouble adapting them there. But depending, you might need to make the framing more like, tied to a movie where you go inside the head of a person, or tied to whatever art form or creative form you kind of imagine your game most to be encapsulated in. Epistolary is an interesting one. Essentially, what epistolary is desynchronized communication. And that's essentially what it needs to be to function. And if you think about it, desynchronized communication is something that also, we still do today, even though it's rarer because we're often on chat together. But it's still something that is part of a lot of communications is email. You could, there's social media, there's instant messages no one replies to, stuff like that. And I've seen, I know someone on the server, I think, was working on a digital age hack where the epistolary essentially takes all those things and uses them as to communicate that in a modern setting. And I know there's been other hacks that do that as well. I've heard, I can't place it specifically, but people have been telling me about some social media epistolary that went really crazy. So yeah, I feel like really the essence of it is that asynchronous communication. And that's kind of why you can change up the context of that asynchronous communication a lot and still have it do the job that the epistolary phase does.
And then actually a further question that was sparked is if you're looking at sort of like in Emma, there are different epistolary options like journal entries, dreams, nightmares, my favorite. How do those fit into that sort of idea of like asynchronous communication, or like are there ways to sort of, I don't know, how would you go about hacking something similar to those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because when you get to Emma, epistolary is kind of divided into two functions. And that is because Emma has a really specific focus of being more introspective and more moody than regular good society. So epistolary not only is asynchronous communication, but it also opens up a secondary opportunity to be used to express the emotions, the mood of the character in a way that has nothing to do with asynchronous communication. And I think this really comes back to what I was saying much earlier about, hey, what's the purpose in what I'm trying to create? What's the story I'm reaching for? And what do I need to add to achieve that? Epistolary is really handy for that because it spotlights different people in their different little moments. So if you're not asynchronously communicating, you can asynchronously be doing something else. You're by yourself reflecting about your emotions or your mood. And honestly, the scope of how you would adapt that to different settings is extremely broad. But I do think that's the other thing, I guess, in epistolary. Like if you remove the communication element, you are still asynchronously expressing an experience.
Right. Thank you. All right. Moving into fight with spirit questions. Is there a systems reference document, or SRD, as the cool kids call it, not me, or guide of some kind to making a fight with spirit hack game? And more importantly, what is the clever name for a fight with spirit hack, a la Forged in the Dark or Illuminated by Lumen, et cetera, et cetera?
All right, I'm gonna be quite short here. To answer the first part, is there a SRD? The answer is sort of. Permissions and license wise, it falls under the community brewed license that I mentioned right at the beginning of this Q&A. But in terms of, is there something you can follow? Is there a guide? Here, I really recommend looking at set pieces. So if you have Fight with Spirit, you'll see that included with it is like a bunch of set pieces that really change up the setting. Like there's two historical ones for playing cricket in the 19th century and baseball, and then there's like a fantasy one for playing on Dragon Ball and the backs of dragons, Sky Ball, that's what it's called, too. And so basically, as well as being cool settings that you absolutely can and should play in, those you'll find that all three of those are structurally very similar, provide the same new elements into the game. And so in a way, those are like your example for how to hack Fight with Spirit to play it for a different setting or context. And we also have the Hadean game supplement now as well, which you can find should put it in the game's resource section if it's not there, but it's definitely findable in announcements in the server, if not, which basically changes the setting and everything up even further. It's like completely wild. You're in the Greek underworld competing in a underworld Olympics. So really, really different to the original setting, but it still uses that same set piece structure and provides the same new content that a set piece does in order to achieve that result. So check out those set pieces, see how they come together. That's really like the guide, I guess, to how to hack Fight with Spirit. Oh, and the clever name bit. I don't have one yet. Me and I did toss it around for a while, but we haven't yet landed on something that we like loved. So we will be getting back to you about that one.
Fighting? Spirit? I don't know.
It's got to be something with spirit, but then what? What? It's all right. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, just games with spirit. Okay. What is the key to writing a good match game card? Tell us your secrets.
Okay. This is, like Desires for a Good Society, something that I have spent a very, very, very long time thinking about. And also, similar to Desires, a very, very long process of testing, seeing what does and doesn't work, and refining my thinking around this. And in fact, we actually gave a talk for a Big Bad Con online called The Making of a Match, which I will link below this as well, that really goes into more detail about this. If you want to hear the extended version of how we came to match games and what's like the building blocks of those and dissect them further, I'd recommend that. It's sort of a Fight with Spirit retrospective, but also from a technical game design perspective, I think it's one of our best talks. So if you're a real game design nerd, you can check that out. But to give you today what I think are the key elements of match games to make them work, the fundamental, most important thing about a match game is that it must both follow an emotional and story arc for a character while also playing out the sports action of who gets the point. So a very obvious example of this would be a game like Team Combo. Sports action, can you score via a combo? Story arc, can your hearts and minds connect under pressure? So it's got those two aspects to it. And more often than not, you will want to leave space for these to resolve independently of each other. So if you're playing the match game off my game, for example, the character's arc is about what's it like to play when they're off their game. And the emotional arc of that match game actually crystallizes when you pick whether you want to like ignore that feeling of being off your game and push through, or whether they want to ask someone on their team for help. So that's the like emotional center of that game. But to find out what happens in the sport, you're going to draw some cards and add some numbers, right? So those are kind of separated. And that means that when it gets to the character reflecting on their feelings at the end of that game, where they have to answer the question, do I still feel off my game? There's not just two options, there's four options. You know, they could win at the sport and feel great. They could win at the sport, but still feel awful. They could lose at the sport, but feel great because their teammate has helped them. Or they could lose at the sport and still feel awful. So basically, we're separating the emotional story from the sports ball story. And this kind of, in a way, comes back to what I was saying about rep conditions ages ago. People don't like being told how their character should feel. They want to make that choice. But people are okay with finding out how the sports ball goes by playing cards and stuff, because that's the game. So you want people to be playing the game to find out what happens in the sports ball, but to be making their own choices and going through their own emotional experience for their character. So that is the number one thing behind match games. A more subsidiary tip that I found useful is just to keep the game sort of like smooth to play and not too complex. The reason is that a lot of the time, if you're playing a match game, might be the first time you've ever seen that game. Maybe you've seen it one time before, and you want people to be able to, as much as possible, be able to just play that game then without being like, how does this work? Do I need to look up extra instructions? Oops, I got the last step wrong. And like, that is something that we had to learn by trial by fire. What do you got to change to help that be the case? And if you are making a complex game, which you actually, you can do if you do want to, then it's just that thing of like playtesting, super, super vital. You will need to change the game a lot of times until it's very easy and approachable. So you're setting a harder task for yourself, but you can do it if you have a complex idea in mind. And from that perspective, I think that you don't necessarily need to like reinvent the wheel with your whole match game, because I recommend taking a look at a few match games you really like from the base game and see if you can combine elements from those games to make your own. And you'll notice that's often what we did. You'll find that games like repeat some of the same elements and might have like one new element to it or whatever it is, because those elements work really well. And if you put different fiction around those elements, it really changes their meaning and reinterprets them. So have a go with that and see what you can get out of the base games, match games to make your own as well.
Great. And before we get to our final question, I do just want to check. We've mentioned that there are resources available in the Discord. For anyone who's not currently in the community Discord, what's the best place to join?
Yeah, so if you sign up to our newsletter and you get any of our newsletters, you will see down the bottom of every newsletter, there is a little section for like, hey, come join our Discord. It's a fun place. And you probably have heard lots about it if you've read our newsletters as well. And if you're watching this video and you're not from our server, you probably came from our newsletter. So you can click that button down the bottom of the newsletter. And if you're not part of the newsletter as well, currently you can sign up for that on our website. And that's the easiest way to get an invite directly there.
And the website is storybrewersroleplaying.com. Although you might know that if you're here.
You can duck go it.
You can duck go it, as all the cool kids do. All right. So our final question for this hacking Q&A is, what are some Storybrewers mechanics or games that you don't normally see hacked, but that you think are ripe for the picking?
I have two answers to this. The first one is Village Song, which is one of our little box games. And basically the context of that game is you are a village leader on an island with other village leaders, and you are drawing cards, which are like the currents of change washing over the island. And you're responding to what's in the cards, making decisions about the future of your village. And I think that this game, not only could it change to any like political context, really, I personally think that there's something fun in this game in that because the cards have so much description and information in them, you can create a whole world for someone that they only experience and get to understand through those cards. So if you're like, wow, how would anyone ever have enough knowledge to play my game about a family ice mining operation? They don't need it. It can be in the cards. And I've always thought that that's something really fun about Village Song that's made me personally want to hack it. I did start the ice mining hack. No one steal that idea. I didn't finish it yet. The other one, for not at all the same reasons, is a free game that we made called The Fictionalized Memoirs of Harriet and Her Three Sisters.
Harriet Wilson and Her Three Sisters.
Thank you. Is a game that will always be close to my heart. And in that game, you play, I'll put the link because I totally butchered the name, but that's fine. You play Harriet Wilson or one of her real life sisters, and you tell their fake story of their lives and everything that happened to them, as well as blackmailing various lovers that they had throughout their lives. That was a terrible description of the game, but I promise you it's a good game.
And it's designed as a one-shot.
Yeah, and it's designed as a one-shot. And I feel like one thing that is fun about that game is the way that it really connects people to relationships and the way those relationships change over time. So it jumps around in timeline a lot, and it reinterprets those relationships through communications in the present. And because of that, I think it could explore a range of different relationships or connections. That one I have actually finished a hack of. It is definitely in the game's resource section of the server, and it is called Souls Duly Owed, and you play witches who are also sisters, and you explore the different people that they have made dark bargains with over the different times in their life and decide what happened to those souls. But
That's
I
a
feel like
very
there's more that can be done with that game that hasn't been done yet. So that's my answer there.
awesome. And then we did get an additional question. Um, what if you want to hack a game in the same arena, not ice mining, don't worry, as another game? So if you want to do mystery or theater, I I'll throw it to you. I'm not sure if there's potentially more context that could help clarify the question a
I
little.
think I understand that. Like, what if somebody has already, um, if a game is a either, I mean, either that the game itself is already about mystery or about theater, but you're creating your own hack of it that is too, or someone else has already created a hack about the thing that you want to hack the game about. And I would say that absolutely two games being in the same genre does not make either of them duplicate or less valuable than the other one. There is a billion million mystery games, as we know, and they're all very different because the way they approach the idea of what is a mystery and how one goes about understanding it in a game context is very different. And there should be a million billion games about putting on theater shows because it's very fun. There is quite a few, I think.
I think there are many.
And so I think it's about you thinking, what is the unique perspective I want to take on this in my game? Like, it doesn't have to be super unique. I say unique like it has to be crazy or novel, but really it's just like, what am I wanting to express about this thing, about this genre, in my game? And what do I need to do to make that change to bring that out, regardless of what anyone else has done previously? And you can totally like play those games and learn from them, but ultimately it's about how you're going to chart the path towards what you want to express.
And I would also love to add that there are already instances of this. I know that um, there are multiple people who are interested in creating hacks of good society where that's set in early Hollywood. But even just in that, they are already so different from each other in terms of the aspects that they engage with. And because of who they're written by, they're like very different perspectives. So I think that
Mhm.
there's always, even if you're not like, what's uh, my specific angle on this? In all likelihood, as a human being, you're going to have an individualized, unique take
Mhm.
on a topic, especially as you're writing, because, everyone's got their own little thumbprints.
Completely agree. And also that made me realize that the ultimate hack I want to see is a Hollywood hack of Harriet Wilson. Oh man, someone make
Okay,
that for me one day and then let me know and I will play the heck out of it. But
great.
yeah.
All right. And with that, we have come to the end of our questions, the end of our hacking Q&A. Hayley, is there anything else you'd like to say before we sign off?
Uh, Thank you all for submitting such interesting questions. They definitely push me in my thinking around hacking and what makes a good hack and different aspects of it. So I really appreciate that. And I look forward to seeing you all at our next Q&A in a couple of months' time as well.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you in the Discord server.